Thank you so much for being here. Thanks. My name is Meagan Keane, and I am part of the Pro Video team at Adobe, and I would love to welcome you to Collaboration and Creative Risk-Taking, Lessons from Sundance Filmmakers. You know, independent film is a medium in which creative risk-taking is essential in order to create films that are powerful, that are pushing the boxes in which we think about the world around us. And often independent filmmakers are having to work with very limited budgets and even more limited time. And so the idea of leveraging collaboration to approach creative challenges is nowhere more essential than an independent film. We are so lucky to be joined today by two incredibly talented director-editor duos, one in nonfiction and one in fiction, both with films here in the festival. So please join me in welcoming Geeta Gandbhir and Viridiana Lieberman, director and editor of The Perfect Neighbor. And Sophie Hyde and, oh my gosh, Bryan Mason. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Director and editor of Jimpa. Thank you all so much for being here with us. I'm very excited about this panel because I had the unique experience to be able to see both of these films before our conversation today, which just makes it so much more powerful to have this conversation. I think a great place to start would be for Sophie and Geeta to share a little bit about what each of your films are about to give people a grounding if they haven't seen them yet. So, Sophie, why don't you start? Yeah. Sophie, you start.
Okay, I'll start. My film, Jimpa, is a multi-generational family drama about a family who go to Amsterdam to visit the gay grandfather of a trans non-binary teenager. And that teenager decides they want to stay in Amsterdam for a year, and it's the family kind of dealing with whether that's the right thing to do and the kind of conflicts between generations, or lack of conflict between generations, as the case may be. And we premiered on Thursday night here, Thursday afternoon. Yeah.
You. And Geeta, can you tell a little bit about The Perfect Neighbor?
Sure. So The Perfect Neighbor is a documentary film that I directed and Viri edited. It's about a family friend. Her name was Ajika Owens, and some of you may have heard about this case here. It happened in the U.S. and Florida, but she was shot and killed by her neighbor, and her neighbor shot her through her front door, the neighbor's front door. And we used primarily body camera footage. There was 2 years of body camera footage that came to us through the prosecution, and we basically made the film with the body camera footage that spanned 2 years, and it really details the sort of the timeline leading up to the incident. You see through this body camera footage, which is very immersive, you get to meet the community, this beautiful community that was living a very normal, kind of joyous, intertwined life before their communal lives were disrupted by gun violence. And so it's kind of the story of the before. I think there's a lot of stories of gun violence, but oftentimes we just see the after, and this is, again, what we found, what made us so interested in this footage is really the lead up to this tragedy.
And both of your films have personal connections to each of you as filmmakers. Why are these two stories ones that you chose to tell now?
Yeah, the film Jimpa is largely based on my own family. So my child, Mason Hyde, who's sitting just there, plays Francis, the non-binary teenager in the film. And the Jimpa character is largely based on my dad. And I guess the other very interesting thing about personal stories is that Bryan, who's the editor and producer of the film, is also Aude's dad. And so our collaboration is long-term and rich. Why this story now? I mean, so many reasons, but I feel like we were really wanting to find a place to explore queer relationships and stories and family and the love and joy that exists in that space, as well as the conversation about how we talk about differences as well inside that space, rather than always the fight outside. And yet, as we're making it, it became increasingly important that we understood that the fight outside was pretty rich and strong at the moment and really necessary as well.
And how about for you, Geeta?
I think so for me, so my Ajika Owens was my sister-in-law's best friend. And so the story came to us that way. My partner, my husband, who's here, who's also a producer on the film, we were immediately on the ground, or he was, when it happened, we were drawn in. And basically, I have nothing else to offer except for my filmmaking skills in a crisis. Like, that's all I have. So, you know, that's all I know how to do. But I think it was also an exercise in trying to mitigate our grief, to piece together this story, to understand what happened. But also, we think it's again, it's a story. This story of a community, again, disrupted by gun violence, but there's kind of the gun violence we don't see it as like a social justice film as far as it's an advocacy film, but really that's a layer of the story. It's really about this community and this family and what their lives were before and after.
It's actually, I mean, it is so powerful the way that you two were able to create these beautiful character arcs and the attachment to these characters in the film, and yet it's all through these body cams and these sort of non-traditional means of storytelling. You know, it's not the true crime that we're used to of late. Was that a choice that you made early on, or was there consideration of, you know, talking head interviews or supplemental footage that you were wanting to use?
I'm going to let Viri take that because she was with me.
Well, I can imagine what an editorial challenge it was. Where
I mean, when I first saw those police calls, you were already thinking about doing the whole film in that, but they had filmed more after with the family, starting to do activism and working through that. But we both immediately were like, let's try. I was pretty determined to make it all out of that because there was so much of it. And every one of those calls did different work and all that. So it was already in your mind, and then we committed to it. And then throughout the whole process, it was kind of undeniable. There were moments where we talked about, because it is this portrait of a community, but AJ, who passed, we wanted to make sure that it was also honoring her, you know, and creating a platform for her. But you're only seeing her in this police footage, which... Yeah, anyway, she does resonate, but it was a moment, I think, probably for you personally, where you were like, well, are we doing enough, you know, to make sure we're humanizing her in this process?
It was a question for us, but I think we wanted people... What's really interesting is because the POV is literally, you know, police, and the police unknowingly functioned like multicam, because sometimes there would be 2 of them on the scene, sometimes there would be 3, and they would position themselves in different places, you know, and they would talk to the neighbors and wander around the community. Sorry, I think my lungs have collapsed from running up the hills. We ran here, and now I'm like, oh my God.
You're not alone.
That's why I'm coughing. But basically, we wanted people to feel like this was unfiltered, and you meet the community, you know, and see them again in their day-to-day life, unfiltered. And that, I think, ended up being real important to us. We did have a lot of questions, like, you know, and I think we did, some of our team members, we showed it to, we're like, oh, we need more of her, you know, we need more, there should be somebody talking about her, there should be, you know, but we just wanted to stick to, again, mostly detective interviews and body camera, just because it seemed to do the work. It was a risk, if you want to talk about risk.
Yeah, talk about, yeah, and I did want to say that something that Geeta directed early on that was my North Star was keeping all of that footage in the POV of the neighborhood. So despite it being the cops, you know, who do, those police in a lot of ways do feel relatively objective. I mean, you could write a thesis paper about all of the different lenses that are taking place here, but they are pretty objective. So now how do you create this space that feels like a portrait, like this, we used to almost say like a play where you're seeing these characters, yeah. So But it was all there. When you watched all the calls, they did different work, they led to the interrogations, and there was just so much to observe in the details. So I was so grateful that Geeta wanted to do it that way and take that risk, because it was something that and I'll just say one last thing, sorry. I'm so excited that it is being validated here, you know, that people are receiving it this way, because my dream in life is to work on things that are specific, you know, and that are pushing for them, that are trying new things. And this was pure gut, you know, pure instinct, the most unique thing I've ever edited. And here we are, yeah.
There are actually a number of very interesting similarities between your two films, and which one wouldn't necessarily expect. But what Viri was just speaking to is the neighborhood as a character. And I felt in Jimpa that there were these communities that were characters, both Jim's community and Frances finding their first queer community. And how did you approach that as like, not a person as a character, but these sort of community bonds as a character in your film?
Oh, me. I guess that was something that was really interesting coming into this film, was the look at different generations. So Jim, a man in his 60s, and his chosen queer family, which we lovingly dubbed the aunties, and there were three beautiful characters who both beautifully written and beautifully realised by some great Dutch actors. Oh, so that's worth saying. The film is part set in Australia and part set in Amsterdam. So seeing their world, and there's a couple of fantastic scenes around a table, like in a cafe with the aunties. It's sort of 6 people, rapid fire dialogue, a lot of overlapping, 2 cameras. So it was very much these 2 very sharp, witty set pieces in the film, which were a real challenge to cut. But when we sort of found the vibe there, it was great. So there's that kind of generation, and then there's Frances, a 16-year-old trans non-binary character who comes in looking for a community and hoping to find a community, and sure enough does. And so there was this kind of beautiful group of probably 20-something-year-old gender diverse people through Amsterdam that were just beautiful, and the links between those characters, and like kind of comparing and contrasting without looking to do that, just the way the script was written and the way that kind of starts to unfold, that you do think, oh, these 2 different queer communities, and sort of seeing them cut together and where they intersect and where they kind of have conflict was really interesting in the film.
And how much did that go into the script?
There's water.
Such a beautiful one.
How much of that was built in the screenwriting? That you knew that those communities were going to be a character? Excuse me.
Are you okay? Yeah. Well, Matt Cormack, who wrote the film with me, is sitting right there, so it's very nice to have you. We always knew that they would shift and change as we started to meet the actors who played those roles, and as we were in Amsterdam, and they certainly did do that. The aunties, the work in rehearsal that we did kind of led us to change some of the script, and their stories kind of became part of it. But a lot of the material was also already on the page, for sure. That's not to say that it didn't then change again in the edit. So for me, there's like one of the things I think is exciting about filmmaking is that the questions of the story are live right until you finish. You know, I think we came from a documentary background as well, and there's often an idea in fiction or in drama that things kind of get set at the script stage, or certainly at the production stage, but I feel like they just live and they keep breathing, and the question keeps being there until the very end, you know, and that's part of what feels good about it. But I mean, I think the other interesting part of the story and the story of the editing of the film is that Brian usually works as a cinematographer and editor. In this case wasn't, but was a producer on the film, so was there from the very beginning and shot second camera. So is part of the building of that community and that world right throughout. So when we're in the edit suite, we've already been together creating that world there.
And we already love the characters. So, you know, your kind of job is then to kind of transfer that to the audience in the best way you can, to be like, well, we have great affection for these characters, and we hope that we can share that with an audience by the way you put it together. I mean, it's interesting because the script is it was such a beautifully written blueprint. And then, yeah, naturally, I think if you're doing your job well, you are able to flex. And as you said, you found difference in the stories from the real characters and the people who are playing those roles, and to be able to be open enough to then let the script change and flex to become more real and more like a lived experience. So when those scenes play out, I think you really feel it, because the people, they are playing a character, but the stories they're telling are from their lived experience. So it's a beautiful version, and I think that's where our doc history feeds into our practice.
And the idea of our creative collaboration being across many, many people, and us all being richly involved in that, like Matt being in the room while that rehearsal is happening, to be able to rewrite those scenes, and you being there to know those guys so well. And all of our team was very much like that, very intricately involved.
We build a family.
I mean, to that point, you know, you talk about we already loved these characters. Was there a part of your creative collaboration where you needed to sort of check how objective you were to sort how the story was unfolding because it's so personal to you?
This is a big question. It's so personally entwined in our lives, and Brian and I edit in an edit suite in our backyard in Adelaide, South Australia. So it's like we just go out there every day. We're completely consumed by that point, and like we don't do much else. And we have to rely on our creative partners, our producer Liam, and the other people in our lives, you know, to kind of help us with that. The truth is, on this one, we made a choice really early on to be very sincere and very emotional and really go for that, and just like not hide behind cool or cynicism. And we decided that's what we're going to do, hard on our sleeves, like go for it. And that meant, yeah, there are times where it's like we don't know. Like the truth is, we try and listen to other people, and you know, but we actually just don't know. We just go for it. I mean, you're always trying to think about an audience, right? You're always trying to think of the story that you're telling and how that might feel. But also, you don't always want to be distant. I think all the films we've made are very personal. This one's very explicitly personal, but they all are, you know. And so, part of what we do is just being right inside it.
And that external perspective, it's actually weird to call it external, but does come a lot from our very trusted collaborators that we work with. A lot of them are here today, sitting in the front row, which is excellent. But other producers, designers, writer, like the feedback on the cuts coming from those guys really helped us have that perspective, because they're trusted people that we've worked with a lot. So it kind of helped us go, are we kind of disappearing up our own story here, or is this a story that's going to translate? I'm not sure about the answer to that question, but we got where we got to.
The topic of trust, it feels like, is so ingrained in the topic of this panel. The idea of collaboration and creative risk-taking and approaching creative challenges really boils down to trust and being able to trust in each other as collaborators. Viri and Geeta, I know you two have worked together on other projects, and as you were approaching this project, what were some of those sort of foundations of trust that helped you sort of jump into the subject matter? Because I'm sure there was a lot to comb through and sort of jump in and get started on how you started building the narrative.
I can start by saying that, so there was a lot of footage. I used to be an editor. I was an editor for a lot of my career. And Viri and I worked together. She was, at one point on a film, she was my assistant editor. So like we have a long history of working together, and there was trust. And so that was a no-brainer. But also similarly, I knew with this project, because it involved my family, that I would be, you know, I really needed someone to be a partner in that. I mean, my partner is my producer, we were with the footage for a while before Viri was free to actually edit it. So we went through all of it and realized how connected it was, that there were 911 calls, multiple 911 calls coming into the station, around the time that the shooting occurred, from different neighbors in the community, and you could hear them, overlapping, and then, you could hear like callers, one caller would call in, you could hear somebody else, also in the station, like receiving another call. So there was just so much interconnectedness, and syncing the police body cameras was fascinating, because one camera would catch some audio, another camera would catch some other audio. So it was kind of that process we did, and then we handed it to Viri, because I was like, here's this giant mess that we've made. Now this is for you. Like, have fun. But I needed Viri to also keep me objective, because we were just a wreck, to be honest. Like, we were heartbroken. So, but I needed someone who could deal with like my grief and my, being inured and my, whatever, but also keep sight of the film. So.
And I know you used speech to text in terms of generating transcripts and going through all of the footage. How much did that help you sort of start parsing through the story?
I mostly use that in the interrogations after. I am someone who is meticulous and obsessive with marking my footage. I practically transcribe it in there, and there's always some high-tech AE that's like, you could just, and I'm like, nope, I have my process. And so but this time I didn't mark up this footage because I just dove in and just started cutting. I don't know, there was something about this project and everything about it where I did it very differently. And then I came to a time where I had to kind of go back through, and the interrogations are very long. And then I hit that magic button. And it was like, it was real world magic to use that. So it came in later in the process, but became clutch. It was like the moment when I needed it, so that I wasn't going to have to rewatch something because I, had just started cutting, hit the ground running. But it was really great.
I used that on the last doc I cut, and it was a lifesaver.
It's
amazing
insane.
because you watch all your footage, and you kind of, and then you get into the cutting. Like, hang on, didn't someone mention that at some point? And then you just plug it in, and it goes, yeah, it's over there, and you're like, oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, and there's for those of us that AE'd, I AE'd for many years. There was always you had the transcript, then the rich text, and then you brought it in, the famous, and you had to connect all it, and now it's just a button. Anyways, those are those moments where I'm like, okay, you AE. Like, I'm learning,
I was thinking about that, like old dogs, and having somebody transcribe everything,
Yes.
and then having the folders and being like, I'm sure somebody said this somewhere.
Yes.
Like,
everybody looking for the time codes and cross-reference. Anyways, it came in at the end, but it was one of those great moments where I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have to go through. No, I'm not. So it was really great.
So to the topic of how you built the story and sort of the chronology of The Perfect Neighbor, often in documentary, chronology isn't the way you do it. You sort of jump here and then you jump there, and you build the narrative by playing with time. But you all chose to really demonstrate the story linearly. Was that always the intent, or was that a sort of creative choice that was made somewhere along the way?
That was the intent.
Yeah.
We knew that it was because it was going to span these 2 years, and it is boiling, right? Like, it's growing. It's, and that you kind of only feel that when you start with the first call and go to the ones where everything is getting more. So the chronology was there. There are moments when the cops aren't there, and there were things that are then told through interviews and interrogations. So the only thing that happens with time is that you're hearing some of those along the way to fill in the gaps, but those in an effort to create more present tense of what was happening in between, when you're not there. But it was always chronological, and on purpose too, to watch how it builds, how it festers, how it goes. And at some point in the film, you're sitting there going, how do we get here, So the chronology was always embedded.
It also builds a trust in the audience, because it doesn't feel like you're being manipulated by things being shown in sort of different order. So you're like, well, is this really as serious as it seems to have been?
That was so important too. This film has such a raw feel to it when you're watching, not only because of the literal frame that the lens is capturing and the way those capture, but to just watch it play out, watch conversations to completion. You know, like really, and 1 to 2 angles. And sometimes, I mean, obviously, there were a lot of cops and went in some difficult times, but yes, it forced some really interesting observation of details and human behavior and various things.
And time is actually something that you all play with quite a bit in Jimpa. And the best way I can describe it is almost like when you blink and a memory sort of sparks in life is sort of how it worked. But, you know, how did those sort of memory flashes get worked into the edit? Was that the intent from the beginning? How did you two approach that?
There was, so there's, I don't know, approximately 70 flashbacks woven through the film. A lot of them were written in, and a lot of them were coming from Soph and Matt as the film progressed and as we kind of started shooting in Australia and went to Amsterdam, as we started to kind of meet the characters and feel what was going on and how the scenes were playing, there was sort of new ideas and new kind of the catalogue of flashback material grew as we were shooting. So we hit the edit suite with an idea that we have this flashback material, and there were instances where there was a kind of blueprint in the script of where they might go, but very early on I remember you were like, no, let's just cut the scenes and then see how the flashbacks will work, which was a double-edged sword, because on some level, like the scenes around the tables with the aunties, which I was saying before, the first version of that I fell in love with, and there was no flashbacks. I'm like, oh, this is great. This is such a fun scene. Look at this. Oh, I was so excited about it. So I was like, yeah, that's cool. Where are we going to put the flashbacks? I'm like, no, we're not going to interrupt it. It's so good. But anyway, that was an interesting process from the beginning of the cut, actually all the way till we finished the film. In the kind of grade and sound mix were the last things we did, and I think we finished those last Friday. And so on some level, it was from the beginning of the cut all the way to then to really kind of know how those flashbacks were going to integrate. And it was a really fascinating journey, because we tried so many different iterations, and it took a while, I think, to land where we landed with it.
It's interesting because our background, we've made some fiction films now, but prior to that we made a lot of documentaries, and we used a lot of found footage in that, interestingly, and a lot of the material was like people filming themselves over many, many years and like reusing that in our story and kind of flashing back through time. And we've done that in many, many projects, actually, all docs. So I think I had a little idea that was like, we know how to do this. You know, like found footage is one thing. It's like you are so inspired by what's there, what you find and what you discover, and then realizing we had to make that and create those characters. And then that was kind of harder to insert than previously. I will say, though, like a documentary is a bazillion times harder in the editor's suite than a fiction film in every instance. Like, you know, praise to you. Like, it's so hard. It's such a difficult process. But we sort of found a little bit of that in this. We were like, how do we make this? I felt very strongly that this was an important part of the story, and that we were pointing out of the frame to these characters, like having other lives and things that we weren't looking at in our main narrative, or moments that kind of helped. Yeah, it's like a little flash in your memory or whatever that is. But they felt really crucial, but getting them to work, you know, I think we largely needed to find sound and music that kind of helped us through that, and we kept playing and changing them and moving them around, and at one point we were just going to take them all out, and yeah. It
was such an interesting balance, because when they started to work, it adds a really nice depth to, like, you meet a character and then you just kind of cut into a moment from their past, and it tells you so much about who that character is, and you get it in like 2 seconds when it works. And when it doesn't, you're like, oh, what was that? Well, that interrupted my thought. And so it was really interesting to kind of find that balance. And as I said, without being a broken record, it took a long time to really kind of feel like that landed in the film, I think.
And to trust in interruption too, because I think I'm really drawn to those films that do a bit of that. And so to trust that an interruption in a narrative is sometimes okay, that we don't have to feel like it's always smooth, or that, you know, that we have to hit the beats the way that some sort of storytelling stuff has told us we do, that we could maybe expand that a little bit.
Well, it's funny because when you think about life, as much as on the surface it feels like life is very linear, you do navigate through life with all of these sort of influences and subtexts and things that sort of influence how you're experiencing the world that are very much not linear at all. And so it does sort of lend itself to that human experience in how you tell the story. I know often, either here in the room or you know, people watching a recording, there's frequently some aspiring filmmakers, people who are, you know, looking to get into this industry. And I'd love to hear from each of you sort of how you approach those, I'm not going to say conflict, but those sort of creative differences of opinion, or, you know, one, you know, as an editor, your role is to sort of realize the director's vision, but you also have your own narrative voice. And so how you two as collaborators sort of work with each other to move through those points of not necessarily aligning in terms of how you think things should go.
I would say for me it's been very easy. I think if you are an editor, and my mentor, Sam Pollard, was also an editor, right? He was an editor, then started directing. I was an editor, started directing, you know. And so for me, I think I love working with, you know, like when I was an editor, having a director who had been an editor was so great, because like he could look at a rough cut and he wouldn't, you know what I mean? Like he understood, like sound was missing and the notes weren't like incredibly annoying. So that was really, you know, he understood the process, you know, that there was a process and this is an assembly and we're just pitching ideas and now, you know, and I feel like there's some of that language here, you know, and also too the idea is, well, let me see it. You know, if you have the time. For me, it's always, well, let me see it. Like, show me. You know, you want to do this? Let me look at it. Let's look at it. Now, technology allows that, right? Which is so great. You know, like, that was not the case when, you know, for me coming up. But it's so much better. You know, you can. Like, okay, here it is. Here it is this way. Here it is that way. What do you think? So, but Viri can talk about what a pain in the butt I was.
No, I was going to say, I can't talk about you because you were too easy. No, it was great. There is an editing language. Yeah, you're one of the few people I can actually show a real rough cut to. Like, but I was going to say exactly what you said, and I'll add one more, which is that whenever I kind of hit it in a faster way, I would just show them. I would show them, and then we could talk about it. Because sometimes if I'm saying it, it's like they don't really understand the director, and maybe even after they see it, they'll be like, well, now I know I definitely don't want it. But I think that showing it, and I think the most important thing I was always learning was the why. I know that sounds obvious, but sometimes you show something and you're just like, I don't know, I like it and I think it feels right. And it's like, no, let's talk about what role it plays in the larger picture of this film, because perhaps it'll work better if we do that thing later or before to set it up. And, you know, it's the whole house of cards. But when I was an AE trying to kind of break into becoming an editor, I just started cutting and showing things and pitching ideas. And then once I was working with directors, not Geeta, because she's wonderful, it just rolls. It's incredible. I'm very grateful. But with other directors that sometimes, yeah, there was a little, no, I'm a pretty positive person, you know, like I'm rooting for us I'm very romantic about what we all do. I think it's so cool. I'm always like, we're making movies, you know, that's who I am. But I am also passionate about having a seat at the table. So I will pitch ideas while honoring the vision of the director. And a big part of that is always really knowing what the idea is, what it's going to do, and why I believe in it. And then if it doesn't work, it can still inspire another layer to our process. So open lanes of communication.
I would just say Viri is the most cheerful editor you have ever met. She totally destroys the stereotype of the cranky. I was the crankiest, particularly, and it's why I stopped, because I was the cranky. I was just like, well, it's your movie. You can, if you want to ruin it, yeah, go ahead, ruin it. You could fuck it up. But Viri is it's like you know what I mean? Like, which is such a joy for me because I like was, you know, I'm sure I like, you know, made many, I gave a lot of directors anxiety by the end of my time, so.
But I'll say one funny thing about that. People have learned certain things I say when it means I don't like it, which now they know. Somebody like let out the, you know, whatever, the rubric of what I say. Like, for example, if I say, you know, it's tricky because, like, and somebody recently told me, if Viri says it's tricky, we know she doesn't like it. So I have to come up with new ways to be happy and nice, yeah.
They know your poker tells. Yeah. I think I learned that too as an editor coming up. It's easy to say, no, that isn't going to work. No, that's, you know, I don't like that idea. And it kind of sucks. Like, it sucks to be that guy in the room and kind of block before you try, I think. And especially if you've got the time, you can try a bunch of stuff. Like, you know, you can try 6 versions of a scene with like, well, what if we just stay in close up the whole time? What if we start wide and go in? That's traditional. What if we go the other way? Like, you can just try stuff, and it's amazing I find every time you genuinely try something, that may not be where it lands, but it tells you something, and it tells you something really interesting. And you know straight away, because you watch it and you're like, oh no, that sucked. Like, I thought that was going to be the best idea ever, and look at that, it sucks. Okay,
Or it confirms
so
to
what
you
did you
that
say?
what you were doing was working. Like, that's the other magic thing. Like, maybe I think I have this brilliant idea, we try it, it doesn't work, and then I'm like, oh, now I understand what is working. So yeah, the what not to do works.
Yeah, 100%. It's that thing where you go, like you said, you want a seat at the table, but it's also not your film, you know, and that's
100%.
a really interesting space to sit in as an editor, because I came up as a creator myself, like making skating films and doing all that, all the bits myself. So I kind of sat in the director's seat. Obviously a very different story when you've got international cast and a big budget on the line and all that sort of stuff. But I really appreciate how difficult it is to sit in that seat and to be the one shouldering what a director has to do. So as an editor, you hope you can like help, you know, and make that thing better by kind of supporting rather than going, no, I do it like this. This is my idea.
And Sophie, for you, like, when do you know to stand by conviction, and how do you know when to say, okay, like, let's try something different?
I was just listening to you guys and thinking, oh God, I've really hardly ever worked with any other editor. Like, basically only Brian, like a couple of times early on, but we've been working together for 25 years or something. Like, so it's not even, the idea you were like, I'll show the director, but we sit in the room the whole time. I'm never not in the room. Which is probably really annoying, I think. But
That would make
we sit there, we kind of have to...
insane.
I
That would make me insane.
I will fully admit, I also, I want to go into my cave and then I'll come back out.
We
with
do
a
not
thing.
do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm a bit, it must be such a control freak, but we do, like, in there the whole time. I mean, sometimes I'll go away, like, to do something else, but no, it's a big part of what we do, and because we grew up, like, literally hand making everything, I don't even know another process. It's like we just get in there and we're like, oh, how do we do this from the ground? And early on, we made so many films that, you know, we edited for much longer than any industrial model would have allowed. Do you know? Like, we spent years in edits on things, and we made our first fiction film was set and shot every Tuesday for a whole year, and it was like it was all in chronological order, and we edited that for so long. Do you know? It was just. It's part of what we do is like, oh, how do we find this in this space now? So it's quite a different process. But how do I stand by my convictions? I mean, sometimes I think I feel like I'm a very collaborative person, but then sometimes I'm not at all. Brian, I did watch, you know, Brian, like, over the years has become someone who, we used to, like, nut it out more vocally and try and justify our positions if we disagreed. Now Brian is much more like shows it or goes, let's do it. You know, that happens a lot more than it used to.
Or I go into my grumpy cave, which is weirdly still the same room. And I just kind of shut down and go, okay, let's try that. And, okay, that actually worked. Yeah, well done, Sophie. Right, let's move on.
He takes the Geeta approach every now and then.
Pull out the grumpy editor. Yeah, pull out it's your movie. Well, it's your movie.
But
we
have to go into the house and live together after that.
I was going to say, it's very,
It's
I
like,
can't imagine. I cannot imagine.
So you mentioned 25 years that you two have been working together. You have all been in the game for a while. How have sort of the tools and the technology helped in some of this process in terms of the let's just try it, or improved sort of your way of creative risk-taking or how you collaborate? In terms of how technology has evolved from when you first started?
Our first year at uni, because we were in the same year, but we didn't know each other very well. But our first year at uni was the first year they were teaching us non-linear editing.
Media 100.
Yeah, Media 100. And so it's very hard for me to kind of put myself back in that idea of linear editing, I suppose. Like, that's always been our sandpit of like being able to move things around. A big part of the way that we would tell stories, I think. You talk about what happened.
Oh, okay. The first exercise at film school was shooting and cutting a Super 8 film on film, so no digitization process. So you're really looking through the footage and splicing it and physically cutting bits of film and sticking them together with sticky tape, basically. And I reckon I got really into that. I was like, oh, this is fascinating. And you have to be so mindful and cautious about where you want to make the cut and why, because it's a physical thing. And if you cut it at the wrong frame, like, oh, I messed that up. Like, so you kind of like, it taught me to be very methodical in my cutting early on. And then, and like the first skating video I made was VHS to VHS, play, pause, record, play, rewind, pause, record, go. And that was, I loved it. It was so fun. And then to jump into non-linear editing, it was like, oh, you can do all of that real quick and then try something completely different. It was a great evolution. And yeah, we've stayed there ever since. Like, and as the tools progress, it just gets kind of easier in a way, because the tools become more intuitive and quicker. And I remember the first sort of 4 gig hard drive I saw was about the size of this table. Like, it was huge and so exciting. You can fit 4 gig on that thing, amazing. And now you can fit a terabyte on a thumb drive. Things have changed a lot. Yeah.
But we used to have to go through so much footage, have so many VHS tapes, so many DV tapes, like, everything, and try and find stuff and put it together for a doc. And now, one of the interesting things is everything's easier, and yet there's just so much footage, right? I mean, you guys just had this. There's just so much footage. Like, you can't always go through it all, I don't think, because everyone's got gigabytes on their phone. Like, it's crazy.
Well, you can if you have the time, but the further you get into, I guess, funded work where you're working with investors and deadlines, there is a point where you have to move faster than you'd like, and you just kind of, that's where you really go into instinct mode in a way, where you kind of like, well, we know what we're going for, and now we've got to get. There's like a good example with this film. We were partway through the post, and everyone collectively thought, oh, let's throw our hat in the ring with Sundance. However, our post schedule had us finishing the film in March, and then we got the acceptance, and we were stoked. Like, oh man, we get to go to Sundance. It's amazing. But it meant 3 months of post in 4 weeks. So it was like, oh yeah, here we go. So it was, and when you get into that zone, it's, the pressure comes in, and you have to move quick. And it is, that's where the kind of, you spoke about organization and knowing your footage and having it all laid up, and that's really important when it comes to the kind of pointy end of the cut, where you need to like move quick, but know your material and be able to navigate it and get there.
I know, I always say cutting is the fastest part, because in docs, for me, watching all the footage, preparing it, planning it, building the wall, all of that, and then when it's time to cut, which is, of course, incredible, but like in the most fun, but it's you just kind of fly, if you've prepared it, yeah. It's funny, everything you said is all the stuff I always say about, I had a friend, we pitched in to buy a terabyte, like we pitched in, and it wasn't even one drive, it was 2 500 gigs stuck together, and we were like, a terabyte? Yeah. And same thing for me in film school, we did the film, so that stuff in the technology realm is insane. But I will say how fast computers are now, because the other thing that would happen is I'd hit export and go to bed, and then you'd wake up and there'd fail, and you'd be like, ah, and you go like to the next day, And now I hit the button, it's like, and I'm like, what? And so that stuff has made it so I can output in an instant. Like if we're walking to, I want to show you something, or like the whole film, like, can we change that one thing and quickly get an export out so we can send it to this? That has kind of blown my mind too in technology. I mean, the first time I exported on a new computer, like recent one, it was insane.
Oh yeah, our film's 2 hours and
Yeah.
it cranked it out in 15 minutes. I was like,
Yeah.
whoa.
What is happening? And yeah, and everything. I mean, also even Wi-Fi and uploading and all of that stuff. So that changed the game and how fast you could turn around. Yeah, pros and cons of endless footage. I've cut some verite docs. I cut a doc that was 10 years of footage, and it was incredible. But I did spend many months. I'm obsessive. I have to watch I'm not. I just won't sleep. If there's not enough time, I just won't sleep. And I was going to say, when I was coming up as an AE, I was on projects for 1 to 2 years. Like, they were always long. The minute I started cutting, we hit this new era where it's 6 to 8 months features. Like, every doc I'm on, it's like 6 to 8 months. I mean, it's insane. And some of the docs, it's fine, depending on what the content is. But when somebody comes with, a many, many years, you just kind of waking nightmares of what's in there that's not, that I'm not seeing. And you match frame back, and you're like, what is this? And so, there is, there's pros and cons. But then it's also incredible because we're capturing everything all the time. And because of, Premiere being able to pull in all the mediums immediately and just go. So it's good. I can't keep up with it all. but I can because I can export so fast. That's my best shot. Yeah, it's good.
I was literally standing here watching the intro video from Adobe and going, oh, that looks good, yeah. I want to use that tool.
Sign us up.
Do that?
Yeah.
It's actually funny how often I hear editors say, I need to move so quickly, and then I say, oh, we have this feature that's going to make it faster for you, and they're like, yeah, but I have my workflow, and I'm going to keep doing it there. I'm like, okay. So to the point of creative risk-taking, you both have created films that are thinking outside the box, that are sort of a different approach to filmmaking. How do you keep that muscle strong of saying, like, I'm not gonna take the obvious path, or I'm not gonna, follow the tropes, that I'm gonna keep sort of pushing outside of these sort of clean lines of filmmaking as you think about your next projects or you go into a new creative concept?
I think making this film was such a joy because it was an independent film. It was truly an independent film. It was just us. There was no. We had EPs, but they were incredibly hands off. They weren't. They weren't looking to give feedback and notes only when asked for. Like, we got to a point where, but I think that is something, if we also, Vera and I both work in television, obviously, and do more commercial stuff. And I think with that, oftentimes you are dealing with this, the mega corporation of people who and suddenly you're hearing from every department weighs in, and suddenly you have 100,000 pages of notes, and you don't even, you're 25 people on a Zoom, also, and then executives come and go, and so that, I think that...
And then you say, well, if that's the commercial you want to make.
Yeah, exactly. Well, more than commercial, it's
That's the closest I get to being that person.
Yeah,
when I'm on Zoom with 25,
Very,
I'm like, really?
That's when I'm
sure.
super cranky.
Yeah.
When you're getting notes from, some department that you've never
didn't
even
watch
heard.
it.
Yeah, that didn't watch it, that just... is there should be more dancing, in a film that has nothing to do with it. But I think so the freedom, I think, with this film was really enjoyable because there were no sort of overlords, if I may, and it was kind of just us, this creative team. So, and I think that allowed us to stay in that zone. I think holding on to that, you can try to hold on to that in other circumstances, and sometimes you just get beat down, it's not possible. But I think if there's something you really want to make, just making sure that in that way, it's making sure your partners, will respect that, and then stay true to it,
I like being a positive, joyful person. And at the same time, I will say that one of the things that keeps me wanting to push it is that everything I'm watching feels the same. I'm tired of what, it's... Not only do I want to make stuff or be a part of making films and all kinds of material that is pushing form and trying new things or following the footage and seeing what works best for that outside of some algorithm or form or comp that everybody's trying to script into it. But it's also just watching stuff. We always say, oh, watch stuff to get inspired and watch stuff to learn from it. I also watch stuff to get rageful about how we should, take all the binds off and try some new things and see what happens. And people will want slow burn. I'm a slow burner, and no one lets me. My first cut is always the most experimental, fringy thing, and then people are like, whoa, they like reel me back in. Not everybody. This is great. But I think that's it. I think one of the things is also what I'm seeing and how that inspires me, for better or worse, to want to do things that are different, just to continue evolving the conversation about approach and how we tell stories. Because things are starting to, we kind of ebb and flow between formula and not in the mainstream stuff. But yeah, I'm like, the older I get, the more I'm just like, what? When I'm picking projects or who I'm going to work with, it's all about who's going to kind of create the most honest process to what we're doing for what's going to serve this story in this moment with these people, and that kind of magic math that happens with what we do.
I think I really like things that feel like the form is interesting or the thing is made in an unusual way. I'm really drawn to those things. Like I heard about your film and I'm just like, I can't wait to see it, because the idea of the footage and the way that you've told it seems so interesting to me. And so if you're drawn to that, how else can you do it in some ways? And it's funny moving into fiction and then working in a space of Olivia Colman and John Lithgow are working with us. So suddenly we are in a world that feels like it's a little bit more conventional than where we've been before, I would say. And yet, how do we bring what we've always done into that? On this film we shot in Adelaide and then Amsterdam for a while, then Helsinki, then we returned to Australia and cast all the young characters for those flashbacks and shot there. And that's a really unusual thing to do, and you have to have a team that trusts you and decide and push all the investors and everyone to accept a process like that. But we had the good fortune of making our first few films completely without any market attachment at all, and that meant prior to that we were always looking for market, and then at that point we got to just experiment and try something, and they were the things that spoke to people in the world. And so therefore that's been like a reason that we can kind of go, well, we really think this should work in this way. I also think I'm just really bad at the other thing. I've tried to do TV sometimes and I can't do commercials at all. I think I'm a people pleaser, but then I'm just terrible at working for someone else, really bad at it. And I just think, oh God, I'm, very stubborn, I think, about certain things, and it hurts me too much. The truth is I'm just a little bit too connected to what I'm doing, and so I have to kind of just go, what's best for this particular project every time? And that's hard work, because you're like, couldn't I just do it the way it's done? No.
Well, I think that's the ideal, though, right? If you can be in a space where the form and the process is specific to the project you're making, rather than a template or a generic version thereof, I think you're going to come out with a piece which is more itself and more kind of has more value in the world through my eyes, I think. Yeah. You do that.
You too.
I love it. Well, I do want to leave some time to open it up to questions from the audience. Often when we're in a smaller audience, people feel a little more comfortable to ask questions. So if you have a question, if you want to raise your hand, and we can, I think, come around with a mic. Oh. Yeah, there in the back.
Hi, I would think it would be difficult to get body cam footage, especially during a prosecution. Did you have to use any social skills to make that happen, or?
Zero social skills when it comes to getting body cam from the police. No, but so basically, the legal team that came on board to work with Ajika Owen's family is attorney Benjamin Crump. He's a fairly well-known civil rights attorney, and but he came on board, and the attorney who worked specifically on the case, Anthony Thomas, he basically filed a FOIA request, so Freedom of Information Act, and sued the police department to make all the material and everything they had public domain, and that's what happened. So it came through, but it's interesting because it came through a couple. The incident happened in June, and I think we got the footage. When did we get the footage? Was it like a couple months later. Yeah, 4 months in. So we were making one doc. We were making a doc about really that was about the aftermath, because we didn't have, sort of trying to, create this story of the lead up just through however we could, just through interview maybe, like we didn't know what we were going to do. And then this body camera footage came to us, and originally we were going through it just to try to help, the legal team, because they were like, there's all this footage, don't you go through, like you guys, this is what you do, find some clips that could make sense for us to use. And then we were like, we went through all of it and we're like, this is the film. But it was the FOIA process. I was actually, again, just working with the family and the legal team is what led to that coming to us.
And I assume the FOIA Act is also how you have appearance license for the neighbor and are able to use.
We actually had to go afterwards. We had to go into the neighborhood. We had to identify the people in the footage. I mean, they were the neighbors. So there was already some communication with them and find them. But there were some people we could not find. Some people moved. Some people, you know what I mean? Like there was a whole process of like locating these folks. That was a whole other journey.
Did you say like there's a Freedom of Information Act, but you still had to sue the police department to get the footage?
I think we call it, the term is suing. Like you said, basically when you file it, it's like,
we're gonna do this.
Yeah,
if you don't give it to us.
It's illegal, but it's really just it's very common. It can be used. The laws vary in very different states, but it's a process often used to get information from like a government institution. They say we're suing the department, but it's not. It's like not suing in the way that like I might, you might bang into my car and then I would sue you.
It's making it legal. Like there's a legal process around it, basically.
Yeah, it's a legal process.
Okay, gotcha.
But I just want to warn you all that the current administration is trying to get rid of that process, like that ability for civilians or like, again, attorneys to do that. And so it's kind of a dangerous thing that we're looking at now. Like had that happened recently, we might not have been able to get the footage. I mean, not that the movie is the most important thing here, but just the idea that like, it's used in cases by legal teams. It was used by the legal team, and so that's threatened, so we just all have to pay attention.
Over here? There's
Hello. Just staying on the topic of the footage, did it come into play at all in terms of securing your insurance, like your insurance for dissemination of the film?
Yeah, we definitely had to go through a whole process. We had to get very experienced fair use lawyers, like lawyers who are vetted in this process to comb through the footage and make sure that we were, again, that it was all public domain. They needed all the backup information to say that it was. But we were able to, with all that material, like with the lawyers backing it up, we were able to get the insurance. But we had to, again, the process of using the footage was definitely complicated. And we had to make sure, again, we had like, there's some people we had to blur. There were some minors. It's funny because the police cameras themselves did blur certain people, but then sometimes they didn't. So it was really strange. So one camera would blur people's faces and the other camera wouldn't. So sometimes, they blur them in this awful, like, square, giant, ugly, like, it was like But so what we did is, they're supposed to redact all the faces before they release it, but they didn't. So we found the people, and got permission from those that we located, and the ones we couldn't find, then we also blurred, obviously to be respectful of their privacy.
Another creative challenge that was interesting in this film is that you were working toward an end that was undefined. I was taken by the fact that, a lot of the sort of culmination of your story happened like a month and a half ago.
It happened in November. Yeah, similar to you guys. We were like, oh shit. Like the trial, the sentencing, when it was like right before Sundance.
But how did you approach the creative challenge of like, we don't necessarily know what the ending is? We don't know what that outcome is going to be?
Well, I was going to say that I don't think the film, although it is an important element, if you agree, is contingent on that outcome. I actually think the story, without spoiling anything, ends where it does before we get to that point in a fashion that does all of the work that was intended. So it's like, that is an important It's an important element to, and everybody here would be like, what happened? You know, what was did she get charged? And so that is, it does say more, but I don't think it was.
We were ready to have a card.
Yeah, we were totally, it was,
Yeah, it
we
was
knew
gonna
at
be
the
a
end was
card.
we didn't, yeah.
The trial is pending, you know, like
Yeah.
just something,
Yeah.
you know. So, but
Yeah.
it timed out for us that the trial and sentencing happened in time. It ruined our post schedule, but it's still, yeah. We are in debt from the post schedule, but you know.
Hello. I am gonna be a first-time feature director soon, maybe. Thank you. And I was just wondering, because my experience is low, but I feel like my intuition is high. What would you guys say about how much, as a director, is intuition versus experience? And like, my second part of that question is, you got any tips or tricks?
Is it narrative? You're making a narrative.
The narrative.
How much is it? How much is intuition? How much is experience? I mean, they're both really important, I think. I mean, like grit, you know, for me, like that's been the hugest thing, is like the hard work of it, just the like getting in, getting your hands dirty, going for it, trying and trying again, and you know, being with each other and making and building and experimenting and all of that, to me has been and continues to be the kind of most important part of it. Like I have a really strong process working with actors, but it is not the same in everything. It's just sort of made up. Like it's like, well, what do I want them to do? And like I just have to come up with something and sort of do it. I guess in part that's intuition, but it is also a kind of robust practice as well of, you know, I have a really strong feeling about doubt and doubting yourself and how difficult that can be as filmmakers, but also how important it can be in terms of like opening you up and kind of letting you feel uncertain. And I fortunately have an amazing filmmaking team around me and people in my life, including Bri, because he's, you know, part of all of this, that allow me to kind of hold on to that uncertainty through it all, and kind of accept that feeling, which doesn't make it easy at all. But yeah, to me, I could not do any of what I do without the team around me, the people with me. Like there's no part of it that feels like an individual pursuit. It all feels like I would have left long ago if the people around me, you know, if I didn't have that kind of trust and the rigor of kind of holding hands together and doing it. That's for sure the only thing that keeps me doing it.
I heard this thing once, which maybe is relevant, that when you first start out, your taste is here, right? You've got good taste, good, like, you know what's good, you know what you like, but your skill level is like here, right? And so the process of filmmaking, and certainly it's been my experience, is trying to bring your skills up to meet your taste. So you can finish something that kind of is what you hope it's going to be, as good as you hope it's going to be. I'm still down there somewhere, but we're working on it. Like, and so, you know, that's an exciting place to be, though, to be looking up and going, yeah, I want to get there. Like, I want to make a thing that I feel like does all the things you hope it does. So good luck with your film. Hopefully it goes really well for you.
And also, I just want to say, trust your intuition while you're having your experience. Like, it's all simultaneous. It's not, you know, it's not like, well, I hope I have one, but not the other. You know, it's not mutually. It'll all just grow together. Yeah.
Sophie, to the question of tips, it seems like there's maybe some of your directing tips if you go see Jimpa.
Yeah, the character in the film is a filmmaker, so there are scenes where she is working with people to teach them or show them her process, I suppose. Yeah.
Which I loved. It was so tender, and yeah, it was. I mean, yeah, go see the film. Get the microphone over. Do we know where the microphone is? Oh, yeah. Can you get the woman with her hand up?
Thank you all for this really thoughtful and deep panel. In terms of collaboration, I went to a film school called Art Center, where, you know, people are kind of really extremists. They're like, just shoot one take of everything. Don't have any options for people. That way they can't cut out your vision. So since this is a collaboration discussion, how do you guys, like director, editor, friend, colleague, artist, soul, do you say like, okay, you're the editor and I'm the director, you edit it the way you think and show it to me? Or do you ever disagree? And since collaboration is the conversation, how do you handle that? Like, or do you always feel like, oh yes too, like sharing a mind?
So I would say, I love the shooting one take. I'm going to think about that. Yeah, maybe that's a great idea. The whole movie is just one, like one. I think, again, we talked a little bit about trust building in the beginning. I think at least with Viri, we talk about our ideas. Like, I'm like, this is my vision for the film. This is how I see doing it. These are the things that I want to do. This is, if there is a comp exists, something like, these are the ideas that come to mind. These are the films that I think about, that I'm inspired by when I make this, if that's possible, But we have a first discussion, and then Viri usually watches all the footage, and then comes back with her own ideas, and we discuss them. And there's Viri calls it pitching. She's like, I have an idea to pitch you, so we kind of like pitch each other our ideas, and then she goes off and does a first pass, then comes back, and or I see it in chunks, but that's how. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I feel like this is specific. I mean, because Geeta and I have worked on many projects together, and they're all very different, the things that we've made. So there is some, the and yes, I think is, rather than just agreeing with each other, there's just a shorthand of understanding and listening to each other. It's not really about presenting the argument. It's just about like, oh, it'd be cool, Well, I don't know. All right, well, what about, And it's just, we just flow, which is really nice, which is something comes with experience of working together for so long. So yeah, I mean, I think that's...
It's building a relationship. I think being an editor-director, well, it's interesting. It's kind of like a marriage. It really is. You are tied to that person, in a way. You have to, and sometimes I feel like having been an editor, sometimes editors play so many roles. Sometimes they're like the therapist, and then they're like, you're put in so, you know what I mean? You have to, you're the naysayer, you're the, you fix everything, you're the fixer. It's a really, it's a challenging role, and a complex one, but it is the best relation. It becomes a friendship, ideally, a true friendship, which I think is, that's what I feel like has happened to us. Viri may disagree, but well, she doesn't have to comment. But you can go to the next
Geeta's
thing.
like family now. It's easy. But I was going to say one thing about your control, the person who's holding control. This is just for fun. I'm not going to turn this into therapy, but I totally had an issue with authority when I was young. I was not good with it. So being an editor early on, when I was like, I can't have someone just boss me around. I'm not a set of hands, So when I said a seat at the table and you were like, oh, that's it. The way you reacted, I was like, you're right. I want to make it clear that, I am there for this vision, But I do think that what we do is so collaborative in all the best ways. And the things that have succeeded the most were the things that were made with love, where everybody did have their voice heard and the conversation did happen and it wasn't a set of hands, and somebody didn't, try to control it to that extent. That's how I feel. I also feel like when I hear panels and I hear other people talk about that, that's the same thing. I always think when I watch something that was made under duress, you can feel it. I know, it's weird. You can feel when films are made with love, and you can feel when films are made with grip. And so that's just something I encourage everybody and all the time, that if you, and that's a red flag for me. If I go to a meeting to meet a director and they're just like, well, I've done a written edit, and, or it's funny, because you were saying sitting there, which would be a deal breaker for me, but however, the scenario, you seem, I'm like, oh, I would work with you. But when you were like, we have our little editing suite out back and we walk to our backyard, I was like, well, I would hang out in there all the time with a director. So I think it depends on the project, the people, the circumstance, and how you collaborate. There's a world where we could probably be in the same, we don't, but I still think you wouldn't be sitting there going, and, camera B. It wouldn't be like TV directed. Can you imagine? No. Anyways, I'm not as precious, but notes are something that, that you really learn. I guess what I wanted to say about the authority thing is, I've really learned the power of notes, because I really felt like I know exactly what it's supposed to be with my director, and you start to learn that collaboration, it's incredible what one idea can ripple out in a project and where it can land, and I really embrace that. I'm not kind of this purist. As I could have fallen down that, I will only shoot what to control. Like, I think I could have become that person in another dimension.
I'm not that person, but I worked with someone more experienced than me, and in like 2012, I had a person in a PSA. In 2012, I worked with someone much more experienced, and in the PSA, I had a person, a yogi, do this little hand gesture, this little heart, before it was in the vernacular. And he's like, I'm not putting that in. That is just so uncool. No. And he was the editor, and I was the director.
That's the cranky editor. That's who you met.
That's
yeah,
who you want,
that is the
right?
cranky.
And now that heart became like a universal symbol of like love, but I didn't have the cojones to stand up for my vision.
Yeah, it's important to be able to do that. You also have to be able to, in any collaborative environment, you have to be able to do that. To stand gently but firmly. Be like, actually, no. That's part of directing and editing.
Yeah, I've learned over the years to do it in a kind of nicer way. Like, like maybe there was a cue in this film where I was like, do we need that cue there? And so it's like, yeah, I really like it. Okay, cool. We'll leave it in, and then you're watching
It's
it
tricky
through the sound mix. Like, so that cue, do you really think it works? Do you think it's good there? And so it's like, yeah, I really think it works. Like, what, cool. Another couple of days, and just one final check. It's like, shut up. No. But that's my thing now. It's like, I'll just kind of voice it and hand it over and kind of say, well, here's what I think and why. And then ultimately, the final choice, it all funnels down to the director, as it should, I think, 100%. Right?
And that happened there were some scenes that I kind of got, I'll say this one specific example, I got really into the police process a bit, even though it wasn't about them. And how they had conversations and knew things before the people in the neighborhood and how they would approach them. And you were so good about always bringing it back to the POV of the neighborhood. And there were times where I was like, but it changes the context of this moment if you know that what the cops have to do for, but she's like, that's not what the film's. So there were these great, where I'd bring it up, we'd talk about it, and then I'd be reoriented. And that is the why. I don't know, it's really trusting the process. It's a love letter to process, and that's what makes the best work.
And it goes back to the point that you made earlier, is that why is really the core of sort of how to anchor these creative conversations, is like, what's the goal here? What's the why behind what we're trying to do?
If someone was like, no, I'm not doing that, I'd just be like, let's leave each other. That's a terrible thing. Especially somebody going, I'm more experienced, no, to somebody that's trying to make something, because we all come in at different levels of experience, but that's not the point. It's not like someone knows and someone else doesn't. It's, and as a director, your job is to kind of try and keep that vision strong and listen to other people. The thing about working with your partner as an editor is that people always think we agree, I think, but actually we are able to we never have to tiptoe around each other. We really can just say what we think, and the idea of having somebody just there like operating is horrific to me, like that they're not bringing their ideas and themselves in. And so I think that's the best thing about, long-term relationships in the edit suite, is like, you will tell each other what you think. You don't have to be nice about it. I mean, you can be nice about it, but you don't have to be all the time. Yeah.
And that's when you talk about your collaboration, that's what makes me think, oh, I'd love to have that experience sometime. Like I would, and I mean that, like if there was some time when
I can build a house in the back.
Okay, great. Great, let's do it.
We'll get funding. It'll be part of the next budget.
I love it.
We need to build a house in the back for Mary.
So that we can, No, but I really, there are times in my mind where I'm like, nope, this is how it happens, this is how I work, or whatever. And then I'll hear a great story, or I'll see kind of the ways and I'm like, I want to play in that playground. Like, that would be fun, and not be a set of hands, right? The reason why I'm saying that is because I've been in experiences where I felt like a set of hands, and that is really the worst soul crunching.
Like, sometimes I talk to directors and they're like, I just want someone who can operate.
Yeah.
And I just think, what the?
And it hurts my soul. Yeah. And we're not wired. And to your point, then you just say, no, this isn't the right collaboration. This isn't the right way to do things, and you'll make your own.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank
Such
you
a
all for
great
coming out.
conversation, and thank you all for being here. go see Jimpa and The Perfect Neighbor. They're both fabulous films. And enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thank you.